I am a peaceful person. I don't like conflict. I choose to walk away because I prefer harmony. Look around you at the modern landscape. We are living in a society that has completely rewritten the definition of virtue. We have been conditioned to believe that the ultimate sign of a good, highly evolved man is his total harmlessness. You are taught to be polite, to swallow your anger, to avoid confrontation at all costs, and to smile politely while people step over your boundaries, insult your intelligence, and disrespect your time. You walk away from the fight, hold your head high, and tell yourself that you are taking the moral high ground. You call it spiritual maturity. You call it kindness. But tonight, I want to strip away that comforting mask and force you to look at the ugly, bleeding truth underneath. You are not peaceful, you are terrified. You are not choosing harmony because you are morally superior. You are choosing harmony because you lack the courage to stand your ground and face the friction of conflict. Your kindness is not a virtue. It is a defense mechanism, a desperate, pathetic attempt to hide your spinelessness behind a label of righteousness. You have allowed your fear of rejection, your fear of discomfort, your fear of aggression to dictate your entire personality. And then you have the audacity to call it being a good person. Let this truth sink into your mind. There is a massive, unbridgeable difference between a man who is peaceful and a man who is merely harmless. A rabbit is not peaceful. A rabbit is harmless. It does not bite because it has no teeth. It does not fight because it has no claws. It runs away from danger because running away is its only option for survival. If you do not possess the capacity to destroy, if you do not have the capability to wage war, if you do not have a lethal edge to your character, then your passivity is not a choice. It is a default state of weakness. You cannot claim to master a weapon that you do not even have the strength to lift. True peace is not the absence of power. True peace is the absolute restraint of immense, dangerous power. To understand this raw reality, we must travel back thousands of years to an ancient Indian battlefield called Kurukshetra. It is the setting of the Bhagavad Gita, one of the most explosive philosophical dialogues ever recorded in human history. A little context, because this story does not survive on its own without it. The Mahabharata, the vast epic this scene is buried inside, is the story of two branches of the same royal family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, torn apart by a feud over the throne that festered for years before a single arrow was ever fired. Every diplomatic option had already been exhausted. Every peace treaty had already collapsed. Both sides had spent years trying every path except war, and war is the only path that remained. This matters, because the conversation you are about to hear did not happen on a whim, in a moment of hot blood. It happened after every alternative had already failed, on the single morning when the fighting could no longer be postponed. Imagine the scene. Two massive, terrifying armies are standing face to face, covering the horizon. The air is thick with the dust of thousands of horses and chariots. The deafening sound of war horns and conch shells is vibrating through the earth. Death is not an abstract concept here. It is minutes away. Standing in the center of this impending slaughter is Arjuna, the greatest, most lethal archer of his time. His bow, the Gandiva, is capable of flattening entire legions. He is a man built for war, trained for combat, destined to lead his people to victory. But as he looks across the battlefield and sees his own teachers, his relatives, his former friends standing on the opposing side, something inside Arjuna completely breaks. His hands begin to tremble. His skin burns. His legendary bow slips from his grasp. He collapses onto the floor of his chariot, tears streaming down his face, and he refuses to fight. Arjuna turns to his charioteer, who is actually Lord Krishna in human form, and delivers a beautiful, deeply emotional speech. It sounds exactly like the advice of a modern spiritual guru. Arjuna says he does not desire victory, kingdoms, or pleasure. He says it would be better to live on alms in this world than to kill these great souls standing before him. He says that even if they strike him down first, he does not want to strike back. He chooses peace. He chooses love. If Arjuna were a modern man, society would applaud him. The world would call him a hero of compassion, a man of profound empathy who chose non-violence over bloodshed. They would write essays about his emotional intelligence. He would trend for his vulnerability. But Krishna did not applaud. He did not comfort Arjuna. He did not tell him that his tears were beautiful or that his desire for peace was noble. Instead, Krishna looked down at the weeping warrior with cold, absolute contempt. He looked at the greatest archer in the world lying paralyzed on the floor, and he called it exactly what it was. He called it cowardice. He called it an act of profound selfishness and mental weakness. Krishna demanded that Arjuna stand up, pick up his weapon, and step directly into the slaughter. Krishna's response is a brutal psychological slap to the face of every weak, passive, people-pleasing person alive today. Krishna saw straight through Arjuna's beautiful words. He knew Arjuna was not speaking from a place of higher consciousness or deep spiritual enlightenment. Arjuna was speaking from overwhelming fear, emotional attachment, and a desperate need to protect his own comfort. His morality was nothing more than a shield to hide his panic. Krishna looked at him and said, "This cowardice does not become you. Shake off this shameful weakness of heart and stand up." Krishna was teaching a foundational law of the universe. You cannot run away from the battlefield of life under the guise of being a peaceful person. In this reality, action is completely unavoidable. Even your decision to do nothing, to stay silent, to submit, to hide in the corner, is itself an active choice. It is the choice to let the chaotic forces of the world walk all over you. By refusing to fight for your boundaries, your vision, your purpose, you are not bringing peace to the world. You are simply validating the tyranny of the aggressive. You are letting the corrupt win by default. True virtue is not found in avoiding conflict. It is found in your willingness to step directly into the conflict when duty demands it. There is a phrase in the Gita for the kind of man Krishna is describing, sthita prajna, the one of steady wisdom. It does not describe a man without emotion. It describes a man who feels the full weight of fear, grief, and anger exactly like everyone else, and simply refuses to let those feelings make his decisions for him. This is the part modern spirituality conveniently skips. The goal was never to feel nothing. The goal was to feel everything and still pick up the bow. It is worth understanding exactly who is speaking these words to Arjuna, because it changes the weight of every sentence that follows. Krishna is not a random charioteer offering motivational advice from the sidelines. Within the story, he is revealed to be the divine itself, taking human form specifically to restore balance at a moment when the world is tipped too far toward corruption. When this being looks at Arjuna's tears and calls them cowardice rather than compassion, it carries a different authority than if it came from an ordinary general trying to recruit a reluctant soldier. The teaching is not fight because I need you on the battlefield. The teaching is closer to, your refusal to act is itself a moral failure, dressed up convincingly enough to fool even you. Krishna goes on to give Arjuna one of the most practical philosophical tools ever recorded, something the Gita calls karma yoga, the discipline of right action. The instruction is deceptively simple. You have a complete right to your actions, but never to the fruits of those actions. Do your duty fully, with total commitment, and then release your grip on the outcome entirely, because the outcome was never yours to control in the first place. This sounds almost identical to something you have already heard elsewhere in the series. Lao Tzu's traveler who has no fixed plans and is not intent on arriving. Sun Tzu's general who wins before the enemy even realizes the war has begun. Krishna is approaching the same insight from yet another angle. The anxiety that paralyzes most people is rarely about the action itself. It is about their suffocating grip on a specific outcome they have already decided is the only acceptable result. Release the grip on the outcome, Krishna says, and the action becomes possible again, clean, focused, undistorted by fear of the result. This is precisely why Arjuna's paralysis was never really about nonviolence. Read his own words again. He speaks obsessively about what he will lose, who will grieve, what the outcome will look like for his family and his name. He is not drowning in compassion. He is drowning in attachment to a specific, comfortable version of the future and mistaking that drowning for moral clarity. Krishna's cure is not stop caring. It is stop gripping the steering wheel of a future that was never yours to steer and simply do what duty requires with your whole heart. There is one more piece of this teaching that almost never gets discussed outside of serious study of the text, and it might be the most quietly devastating line in the entire Gita. Krishna tells Arjuna that it is far better to imperfectly walk your own duty than to perfectly walk someone else's. Sit with that for a moment, because it dismantles an entire industry of modern comparison. You are not failing because you have not matched the output, the income, the aesthetic, or the visibility of the person you keep comparing yourself to online. You may simply be measuring yourself against someone else's dharma, a path that was never assigned to you, that you were never meant to walk identically, that you are quietly torturing yourself for failing to copy. Arjuna's duty was war. It would have been disastrous for him to imitate the priest's duty of quiet contemplation, just as it would be disastrous for the priest to imitate Arjuna's duty of the sword. The point was never to walk someone else's path flawlessly. The point was to walk your own path completely, even badly, even with trembling hands, rather than abandon it for the comfort of someone else's well-trodden road. Think about the ultimate archetype of a strong man. He is not a harmless, fragile creature, afraid of his own shadow. The most respected, formidable men in history are those who possess a profound capacity for destruction. They are dangerous men. They carry a dark side, a sharp edge, a fierce, unyielding power within their souls. But the reason they are virtuous is because they have placed that immense power under absolute conscious control. They are like a lethal sword that remains perfectly quiet inside its sheath until the moment of crisis arrives. They do not seek violence, but they are entirely prepared to unleash hell the moment their boundaries are crossed. When you spend your life avoiding every single confrontation because you want to be liked by everyone, you are giving away your sovereignty piece by piece. You are letting your boss underpay you, your peers disrespect you, your circumstances dictate your destiny. You smile, you nod, you pretend it doesn't bother you because you are a good person. But inside you are rotting with resentment. You are filled with a silent, bitter anger because somewhere underneath the smile, you know you failed to defend your own worth. Modern psychology has a name for exactly what Arjuna was doing on that chariot floor, even though it was written thousands of years before psychology existed as a field. Trauma researchers describe 4 basic survival responses to threat: fight, flight, freeze, and a 4th one that gets far less attention than it deserves: fawn. The fawn response is the nervous system's decision to appease, agree, and smooth things over at any cost, sacrificing your own boundaries to avoid the discomfort of conflict altogether. It is frequently mistaken, by the person doing it and by everyone watching, for kindness, patience, or emotional maturity. It is none of those things. It is the body's oldest, most primitive bargain. If I make myself small and agreeable enough, maybe the danger will pass me by, wearing the disguise of a virtue. Arjuna's tears were not enlightenment. They were a textbook fawn response, dressed in the most beautiful language anyone has ever used to describe it. You can see this pattern everywhere once you know what to look for. The employee who says nothing for 3 years while being quietly passed over for promotions he was clearly owed, who tells himself he is being a team player, a humble worker who lets his results speak for themselves, until the day he finally explodes at a meeting over something almost unrelated and gets labeled as the unstable one, when the truth is he simply ran out of room to keep swallowing the actual grievance. The friend who agrees to every plan, every favor, every inconvenient request for a decade, who is praised constantly for being so easygoing, right up until a single denied request triggers a reaction so disproportionate that everyone around him assumes he has changed, when really he has simply run out of fawn left in the tank. The fawn response does not make conflict disappear. It only postpones the bill, with interest, to a date and a context you no longer get to choose. Krishna explained to Arjuna that every individual carries a dharma, a supreme duty, a path that must be walked regardless of how difficult, painful, or uncomfortable it becomes. For a creator, an entrepreneur, a leader, anyone trying to rise above mediocrity today, your battlefield is the market. Your battlefield is the arena of execution, discipline, and competitive excellence. There are times when walking your path means disappointing people. It means saying a hard no to those who want to drag you down. It means cutting off toxic relationships, facing the fierce jealousy of your peers, enduring the bitter friction of competition. If you collapse the moment the pressure rises, if you back down because you want everyone to love you, you are betraying your own potential. You are abandoning your dharma exactly the way Arjuna tried to abandon his chariot. Picture 2 people standing at the edge of the exact same conflict. The first person has spent years building an identity around being easy to work with. He is the one who absorbs the unfair workload without complaint, who says yes to the favor he resents, who lets the client push the deadline impossibly tight rather than risk the awkwardness of pushing back. In week 1 of any given conflict, this strategy looks like it's working. Everyone likes him, nobody is upset with him, the peace appears intact. He tells himself he is playing the long game, that being agreeable now will pay off in goodwill later. By month 3, the resentment has been compounding silently the entire time, invisible to everyone except him. He has said yes to a dozen small violations of his own boundaries, each one too minor on its own to justify a confrontation, but together forming a debt his nervous system has been quietly tracking the whole time. He starts losing sleep over things he can't quite name. He starts feeling a low simmer of contempt for people who have done nothing wrong except ask him for things the way he always agreed they could. By month 8, something finally breaks, not gracefully, not strategically, but explosively, over something disproportionately small, because the actual grievance was never really about that one thing. It was about every other thing he swallowed in silence for the previous 8 months. People around him are stunned. He seemed so calm. He was never calm. He was simply unwilling to fight small battles, which guaranteed he would eventually lose a much larger one to his own suppressed rage. By year 2, he has either burned a relationship down to the ground in one ugly night, or he has quietly resigned himself to a smaller, more bitter version of his own life, having decided it is safer to keep absorbing the debt than to ever risk the explosion again. The second person draws the line early in week 1, calmly and without apology. The moment the first real boundary gets tested, it is uncomfortable. It costs her some short-term approval. A few people decide she is difficult or not a team player, exactly the labels the first person was so desperate to avoid. She feels the same fear he feels, the same tightening in the chest before a hard conversation, but she does not let the fear cast the vote. By month 3, the people around her have recalibrated and now simply respect the boundary, because boundaries that are defended immediately rarely get tested twice. The friction she absorbed in week 1 has already stopped costing her anything by month 3, while his unpaid debt is still quietly accruing interest in the background of his own mind. By month 8, there is no explosion waiting to happen, because there was never a debt being quietly built in the dark. She has had several small, mildly uncomfortable conversations instead of one catastrophic one. By year 2, she has a reputation for being direct, occasionally inconvenient, and completely trustworthy, the rarest possible combination, and one that almost always outlasts being universally liked. Sthita Prajna was never about avoiding the fight. It was about fighting it small, early, and on your own terms, instead of waiting for it to fight you later on terms you no longer control. It is time to stop being the harmless rabbit pretending to be a saint. It is time to develop your teeth. It is time to build your claws. This does not contradict everything this channel has built across Musashi, Lao Tzu, Tsunetomo, and Sun Tzu. It completes it. Musashi taught you to remove feeling from effort. Lao Tzu taught you to remove force from outcome. Tsunetomo taught you to remove hope from fear. Sun Tzu taught you to remove information from exposure. Krishna is teaching you to remove avoidance from duty. Every other lesson in this series has been about restraint, holding something back, staying quiet, staying calm, staying patient. This is the one lesson that says restraint, without the willingness to strike, when striking is genuinely required, is not wisdom. It is simply cowardice wearing the same calm face as wisdom, and the only way to tell them apart is to watch what happens the moment a real boundary actually gets crossed. Tomorrow morning, when you step out into the world, do not seek validation from the crowd. Stop trying to please people who do not care about your ultimate victory. If you encounter injustice, face it. If you face a challenge that demands everything you have, do not shrink back. Do not let your fear dictate your reactions and call it kindness. Look at your goals with the cold, unshakable gaze of a warrior who has accepted the reality of the struggle. Understand that growth requires friction. Success requires conquering obstacles. True peace only belongs to the man who has the strength to stand his ground in the middle of the storm and win the war within his own mind. Understand too that picking up the bow does not mean becoming cruel, reckless, or eager for conflict for its own sake. Krishna never told Arjuna to enjoy the war. He told him to stop hiding from his role in it. There is an enormous difference between a man who fights because he has lost control of his anger and a man who fights because he has finally stopped letting his fear make decisions on behalf of his values. The first man is dangerous to everyone around him, lashing out at whoever happens to be nearby when the pressure finally exceeds his capacity to hold it in. The second man is dangerous only to whatever was already threatening what he was put on this earth to protect, and calm everywhere else because his action was never fueled by the explosion of suppressed feeling in the first place. It was fueled by clarity. Anger is what happens when a fawn finally runs out of road. Dharma is what happens when a man simply stops fawning at all. This distinction matters more than almost anything else in this entire teaching because it is the exact point where people misuse it. Plenty of men read a passage like this and use it as permission to become harsh, dismissive, or needlessly combative, mistaking cruelty for strength because both happened to look unafraid from a distance. That is not what stood on the battlefield at Kurukshetra. Arjuna was not told to slaughter indiscriminately or to enjoy the suffering of his enemies. He was told to fulfill the duty in front of him without flinching, with total focus, and then to let go of the outcome the instant the duty was done. Strength without discipline is just another flavor of weakness, dressed in louder clothing. The sword that is drawn for no reason at every provocation, against every minor inconvenience, is not the sword Krishna was describing. He was describing the one that stays in the sheath through 1,000 small indignities and is finally drawn, without hesitation and without apology, on the one morning it actually matters. The time for making excuses is completely over. The illusions of your fake kindness have been stripped away, and only the raw necessity of action remains. Look back at everything this series has built. Musashi taught discipline without the need for feeling. Lao Tzu taught flow without the need for force. Tsunetomo taught courage without the need for hope. Sun Tzu taught strategy without the need to be seen. And now Krishna teaches duty without the need to be liked. 5 philosophies, 5 civilizations, separated by oceans and centuries, each one quietly arriving at the same uncomfortable conclusion from a completely different direction. The untrained mind is always looking outward for permission, for a feeling to justify the effort, for the world to cooperate, for hope to soften the blow, for an audience to validate the silence, for everyone's approval before it dares to act. The trained mind needs none of it. It simply does what the moment requires, releases its grip on what happens next, and keeps walking. Pick up your bow, tighten your grip, step directly onto the field of your destiny, and refuse to back down. The battle is here, the drums are beating, and the world is waiting to see if you have the courage to stand up and fight. Get to your feet.